welcome back to The Pew, everybody. I am your host, John Edwards, and I'm excited to bring to you another bonus episode of Just a Guy in the Pew. If you've been following us and keeping up with us, you know that every once in a while we take a break from the regular show and we have on one of our favorite Catholic presenters or evangelists, and today is no different. I'm super excited to be joined by my friend Matt Fradd. Here in a second, I'm going to bring him up, but first I want to tell you a little bit about him. Matt Fradd is the creator and host of the Pints With Aquinas podcast. He's the author and co-author of several books, including Does God Exist and The Porn Myth. He is also the creator of Strive, a 21-day detox for porn. He earned his undergraduate, graduate degrees in philosophy from Holy Apostles College and Seminary, which also awarded him an honorary doctorate. He and his wife, Cameron, live in Steubenville, Ohio, with their 4 kids. And as a side note, he is also my favorite Australian behind Mel Gibson, Paul Hogan, Steve Irwin, and the guy who plays Thor. So without further ado, I want to bring up my really good friend, Matt Fradd. Matt, it's so good to have you. Thanks for joining me.
You got it, mate. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show a while back. I mean, it's just been such a blessing, and I can't tell you how many people come up to me now and call me Stone Cold Steve Austin as soon as they see me. So thank you for that gift. It gives me permission to wear my wrestling gear out everywhere in public now. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, well, buddy, I'm so glad to have you on. So many people have asked me to, once they figured out we were friends and knew each other, to have you on. With our podcast, it's really centered towards just helping men get through the everyday struggles in their life. So one of the things I want to talk to you today, obviously, about is porn. You've done a lot of work with that in the church and with men and women around the world. But first, before we get started on that, I really wanted to just kind of let you talk a little bit about yourself. Oftentimes people are used to seeing you interview all these great people on Pints with Aquinas, and a lot of your episodes are based on what they've done and who they are and what they're working in. But I just really want people to get a chance to know, who you are a little bit and how you got started with all of this.
Okay. Well, I suppose the first thing people do when they talk about themselves is say where they're from. So I'm from a small country town in South Australia called Port Pirie. There's about 16,000 people, but unlike a lot of American towns, it wasn't one that just bled into the one next to it. There was hours of farmland that sort of surrounded it until the next city. So it was kind of a small country town to grow up in. I got a brother and a sister. I met my American wife doing Net Ministries, which is a ministry in which people travel throughout a particular country and run retreats in high schools. So I met my wife ministering in Ireland. We got married in 2006. We've lived in several different countries. We have 4 beautiful kids. Yeah, and I don't know. Pints with Aquinas started pre-Trump, which is the podcast I run, for those who aren't aware, back in 2015 or something. So, yeah, let me know if you want to know more about that. But that's basically what I do now. Like most human beings, I have a podcast, and it's called Pints with Aquinas.
Well, and it's one of the most popular ones in the church. I mean, I saw today on Facebook, I think you hit 180,000 subscribers. So that's amazing. Yeah. I mean, did you ever think when you started this, I know you worked for Catholic Answers and various other things along the way, but did you ever think, like, I'm going to be a YouTube sensation, if you will, with 180,000 followers, and just the impact you're having on the church right now?
Yeah, okay. So it's a weird thing to try to process. Like, in one sense, like, success is always relative and elusive. So you probably know this for yourself. Like, you start a YouTube channel and you're like, I'd be surprised if 10 people subscribed. Oh my gosh, I've got 10 people. And you think to yourself, imagine if I could get 100, that'd be amazing. And then you get 100 and you think, oh, that's incredible. Imagine if I could get, you know what I mean? So in a way, like feeling like, wow, this is it. It's sort of very elusive, but at the same time, I think it is appropriate to sometimes sit back and say, wow, what a real blessing. I feel like the Lord's hand has been in this somewhat, and I hope that he makes up for my deficiencies. And it's helpful to sit back and go, wow, praise God, this is really great. Just on Friday, I got an Instagram message from a fellow who was in jail for 5 years doing Antifa riots, maybe
Wow.
prior to the more regular things. And he was an atheist, and he said that Pints with Aquinas has since helped him become to join RCIA, and I think it's this Christmas he'll be becoming Catholic with his son.
Wow.
So occasionally you hear things like that, you're like, oh, glory to Jesus Christ, that's powerful. And I know I'm sure you have stories like that as well.
Yeah, it is. It's great. It is those nice kind of. It's like almost a hug from God when you get one of those things, right? Because what I don't think people understand when you're doing this, when you're in ministry or you've got a platform like this, just how much time you spend wondering, like, what I'm doing helping people? Is what I'm doing making an impact? Is it making a difference? Am I following God's will in my life, the right way, and all those things? And so it is such a relief or such a blessing to hear something like that, because all right, God's doing something with this. This isn't just me in the corner of my room wondering if I'm doing the right thing or not. This is actually something He wants and He's blessing.
Yeah, and then to realize in the midst of all this that He wants you more than He wants to use you. And
Yeah,
so, however, in whatever ways He chooses to use us as a blessing, but never to lose sight of the fact that He wants me. He wants a relationship with me. He wants
yeah,
to reveal His kindness to me. He wants me to shut my senses to the external world, as it were, and pursue Him above all things. And that's tough. Like, it's tough because it's not as immediately rewarding as setting out a video and saying something you feel like needs to be said and getting some immediate feedback. And that's all very good, But I
yeah.
think there's always a temptation there to forsake the interior spiritual journey for the kind of external periphery thing. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does, and it's something I think I'm sure you probably come across this too. But you can when you have a platform again, or you're out in front of people, there can be a thought process by a lot of people to think, well, this person has it all figured out, right? He's got the answers. He's the one up here helping everybody. But I think it can get lost about how we're still broken individuals, right? And we still have our own issues and our own things we're dealing with, and that's where that vulnerability you and I have talked so much privately about, comes into play. Is one thing I love about you is you don't hide that you've had issues in your life, or that you've had struggles, or you don't pretend to appear as if you have everything figured out. And I think there's something real and authentic about that. And I think it's something that draws people to you and to anyone who sits up there, because I've been the guy at a conference, before I got into this, and you look up there and you see somebody, giving an amazing talk or sharing something that might have, they've learned in their life. And you're thinking, man, this guy must have come out of the womb with like a Bible and just, an
Yeah.
amazing relationship with God. But that isn't the case, right? And I mean, so how have you dealt with
And
that in your
and
life?
well, yeah,
Yeah,
not only like that, but even today, like, right, like we're all sort of journeying and struggling and repenting and striving and falling down and getting back up too. Like, because I remember feeling really discouraged when I was trying to implement some simple prayer rule for my young family. I think it was to
mm,
pray the rosary every day or something. And I remember finding myself so frustrated because like people weren't paying attention, or I wasn't allowing them basically to be like a 3-year-old or something, And I
sure.
had these ideas in my head that the Hahn kids, or Jason Everett's family were all sort of levitating or kneeling on glass that had been smashed prior to the rosary or something. And it's an exaggeration, but like at least that they were all sitting, being very attentive, and it's like it's nice in some ways to realize like actually you're not special. Like
Right.
these struggles that you have with purity, or with marriage, or with intimacy within marriage, or trying to develop friendships with other men, or your own sort of self-esteem, if that's a thing we can use anymore. People say you shouldn't have esteem in yourself. That's probably true, but your own confidence, your own, these sorts
Sure.
of things, like these are all we're all kind of dealing with it at the same time. So it's kind of nice to realize you're not special, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, his fatherhood, I mean, I know you got the 4 beautiful kids, and his fatherhood been a struggle. I mean, I know it is for all of us, but I mean, you just mentioned some of that, of trying to sort of keep up with the Joneses, if you will, or what you think the thought, what the Joneses are doing with their family. Has that been a struggle in your life? And like, how have you sort of, as you grow older and your children grow, how have you really come into your fatherhood and really started to try to live that in the way that God calls us to live it?
Yeah, certainly trying to keep up with the Joneses in the sense of like spirituality and fatherhood and husbandry, like all those sorts of things, more than the financial things, which I never really had a shot at. So I guess I just kind of dismissed it right out of hand. But um, yeah, it wasn't easy for me when we started having kids. I was surprised by that. I thought that because I wasn't sort of cheating on my wife or doing anything outrageous, that I'd get this fatherhood thing. Like, I get it. I get that it's about sacrifice. I get that it's about, like, it's not about having trophies. Those aren't your children. Like, your children exist for you to get them to heaven, and they're going to help you get them to. I
Hmm.
knew all of those one-liner cliche things in the
Sure.
Catholic sort of world, but I didn't realize just how difficult it would be. And I think it had a lot to do with my own sort of woundedness and things like that. So it wasn't easy. And I remember, like, I would find it so hard, just not having your own time anymore, having children screaming throughout the night. Like, we had some difficult kids,
Yeah.
um, and just not having sleep and trying to now adjust to this new relationship I have with my wife, who's now wife and mother, not just wife. She
Sure.
doesn't just exist for God and me. It's God, me, and these kids, and yeah, so that was difficult. And I remember, like, saying to other men, like, this is hard, right? And a lot of them just not seeming to get it, or at least a lot of them not seeming to have struggled to the depth that I had. And so
Sure.
they'd usually say things like, yeah, but what a blessing, I mean, have these beautiful kids, I'm like, oh God, I feel so alone. I feel so
Yeah.
alone in this. Like, I want to be a good dad, but I see my own selfishness, and I want my own freedom. And yeah, so it's coming to grips with that has been one thing. And then another thing I think the Lord's sort of doing in my heart right now is this idea of wanting the right thing is something that we usually begin to do after our conversions to Christ, right? We want the right thing.
Hmm.
We no longer want what's bad. We want what's good. But the
Sure.
struggle is wanting the right thing in the right way. So, like, wanting the right thing, so that might be like my child to speak more respectfully or to inculcate a sort of prayer life in his or her life, but to want that in the right way. That is to say, like, with gentleness and with
Hmm.
patience and with understanding. And that's sort of what I'm working through now, I guess.
Well, that's the difficult part, right? I mean, it's easy to say all those things, and it's easy to portray that we're doing them well, but fatherhood is just like anything else in life. I mean, you go through it, and you're learning as you do it, and you learn from your mistakes, and you're also trying to not repeat the mistakes that may have been, bred into you that your father or your mother made. There's always the struggle with that. I can't tell you how many times, when Jacob, messes up or one of the girls does something wrong, I'm just something will come out of my mouth and I'm like, that's my dad. And I said I would never do that. Right. So there's always that struggle too. And as far as selfishness, like you're talking about it, when people ask me about marriage or fatherhood, younger guys, that are in their 19, their teens or their early 20s, and they're questioning that and starting to look at that at their life. They're like, what would you tell me about marriage? And the first thing I say is you're going to figure out exactly how selfish you are very quickly. Like,
Yeah.
very quickly, like those things come to light. What do you mean I can't go to the bar anymore on Tuesday nights to have a beer with my buddies? What do you mean? And it's really a
Yeah.
growth process that you have to go
Yeah.
through, and especially when those kids come along.
One of Cameron and I's little hobbies or things we enjoyed doing prior to kids was to sort of potter about a little bookstore, you know,
Hmm.
latte in hand, and sort of page through some sort of spiritual work in the religion section and nod sagely as you imbibe this wonderful heavenly advice about laying down one's life, and this is how we live. And you're like, yeah, amen. Sip of the latte, sip. And so what I realized was when I had kids, it was like being force fed 1,000 spiritual books in a day, you know. And
That's right.
it's like it's one thing to be romantic about it. It's another thing to live it, and to live it is often a lot messier than you'd like to admit. But that this is the way we get there. That's the way we
Yeah.
get there.
Well, were your parents, were they religious? I mean, did they bring you up in the faith? I mean, how were you always Catholic? I mean, is this something that came along later? What's the story with that?
My mum took us to mass every week. Dad stayed home and sort of watched the football.
Mm-hmm.
My grandma was pretty intensely Catholic, so we'd usually swing by and pick her up on the way to mass. Uh, I just found it boring. I didn't really want to go. We didn't really pray outside of that. And towards my teenage years, I just started to sort of rebel against it. God bless my
Mm-hmm.
mum. I must have put her through a lot of hell. She faithfully tried to go there every week, without the support of my dad.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, so no, I guess by the time I was like 15 or so, I think I had pretty much become an agnostic. I thought that people talk about prayer helping them, but they also say that when they journal. People journal, they get their
Sure.
thoughts out and they feel clearer. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought prayer was like that. It doesn't mean God exists or that he cares about you or anything, but that, you
Mm-hmm.
just kind of get your thoughts out orally. So it's like an oral form of journal entry or something.
Sure.
Um, but I was really interested in sort of spiritual things because I've always sort of been inclined to the more philosophical questions. And so I loved poetry, and I started to get into sort of new age cassette tapes and meditation and things like that a friend of mine had. But whenever there was like a word that was religious, I remember it really turning me off, like heaven,
Sure.
even if they didn't mean it in a Christian sense. I was just kind of being turned off by that. But I was very much open to some sort of spirituality that didn't have a sort of moral component, I suppose you'd say.
Hmm.
But that changed, and I won't belabor the point because I think a lot of people know this, but that changed when I was 17 years old and went to World Youth Day in Rome, Italy. And I had a conversion to Christ and came back a ragingly joyful Catholic. Yeah.
Well, was it something particularly that day that happened? I mean, was it something somebody said? Was it a speech someone gave? Was it being around all the other youth? I mean, what was you think was the point for you where it kind of clicked?
Yeah, probably all of the above. It was about a 2-week journey, and I'd never been outside of Australia, and was suddenly surrounded by young Catholic Christians who believed this stuff. I just figured they would be people like me whose mum or dad talked them into going. I actually had never encountered someone, 17, 18, in their early 20s, who really believed this stuff and who wasn't sort of weird. They weren't sort of, there was nothing wrong with them. They weren't socially awkward or something. They were just
Yeah.
lovely people who loved Jesus Christ and had reasons for why they believed these sorts of things. And that was a real eye opener to me. And so I began asking a lot of questions, and
Mm-hmm.
I encountered their joy. Was that there was a thickness to it. It wasn't just sort of like a glib sarcasm that me and my friends exhibited.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really began to pray, Lord, if you exist, if this isn't just a fairy tale to make us feel better about death, it'd be really nice if you'd reveal yourself to me in a way I would understand. And there was several sort of prayer experiences where I felt the presence and love of God, and it moved me to great uh, repentance and weeping and
Mm.
joyful weeping. And yeah, I sort of came home, and the way I described it, and I think a lot of people who are converts, they understand this. It was almost like there was another sense, akin to sight, that I didn't know about and none of my friends knew about, and all of a sudden, it sort of opened, quote unquote, and I'm just seeing the world in a different way, and tried to explain and convince my friends of it, and kind of freaked a lot of people out actually, and turned some of my friends off of me and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
what did I care? I had the God of the universe who loved me, and I knew that, so I wasn't terribly concerned with it.
Yeah, I
But
know
yeah.
exactly what you're talking about there. I mean, you're exactly right. It is like a window's been opened that you didn't ever know was there before. I mean, I had that same feeling in jail when he came back. Well, when I came back to him, I guess you could say, when he had the door open always. But when I finally got it out of my thick head to quit running away from him and embrace him. But you mentioned a couple things in there. You said, deep repentance earlier. You said one of the reasons that you struggle with the faith was the morality part of it. What were you going through in your life then that maybe kept you away from those things? Were you struggling with anything in particular, like certain sins or things like that were really kind of maybe making you turn away from the faith in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, it was a host of things. I think we all like to make excuses for the sins we don't want to let go of. We all want to justify those behaviors we have no intention of letting go of. So there was like, I think, yeah, a deep selfishness and a self-hatred and pride and lust, had been fornicating with a particular girl. And I remember once saying to her, if you get pregnant, you'll just get an abortion, right? Just that kind of mentality. Pornography, thievery. Yeah. Like I would steal things and, just all sorts of stuff like that. And
Sure.
yeah, like I remember prior to this conversion being like, well, okay, like heaven and God, and that's cool. That's cool. But just being really turned off by the idea that I'd have to give up some of this stuff. But what ends up happening is when you encounter the beauty of God, the ugliness of sin reveals itself as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually find that it's a little easier to give it up than you first thought. It's just like,
Yeah,
oh,
sure.
I see it for what it is. And that's really yuck. I don't want that anymore. So.
Yeah. Well, I know one thing you mentioned lust, and I know you've spent a lot of your time over the last probably, 20 years traveling the world speaking about pornography and just helping people in many ways through the Strive program. I had the blessing of helping a little bit with
Yeah.
that at Cardinal Studios, when you first came out with that. And I know it's a big help with Covenant Eyes and some of the other places there. I know you've written The Porn Myth. You've done a book with
Hmm.
Jason Everett called Forged. I mean, you've just done so much with it. What this is something that men struggle with. Obviously, you know that as well as anybody. But it's always a common thing. Whenever I put something out to the listeners or anything like that, what are you dealing with? It's like porn, 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 anger, porn, porn, pride, porn, porn, porn. And so let's talk a little bit about that. Like, obviously you said you struggled. What sort of helped you turn that corner and really helped you kind of launch this your ministry to help people that are struggling with it?
Well, I think the healing continues and deepens. And to me, I
Mm-hmm.
think there's been like two primary sort of stepping stones in my wanting to turn away from pornography. And I think they're common to all of us. I think what happens when a Catholic man decides or a Christian Protestant man decides that he wants to stop looking at porn, it's like he understands generally now why pornography is evil in a way that he
Mm-hmm.
didn't before. So before he would say things like, well, she's willing to do it and I'm willing to watch. No one's being hurt. And so long as that's the case, then that's all right.
Sure.
Or, if I look at this from time to time, it's not interfering with my life, like, then that's okay. There's certain excuses that one makes to justify this behavior. But there comes a time, I think, in a man's life who's serious about the Christian faith, and he starts to realize, oh wow, this is turning people who have been created in the image and likeness of God into sort of two-dimensional objects for my consumption. And we probably shouldn't be treating people like, a pack of cigarettes or a steak or a can of beer. They're not things
Mm-hmm.
to be had. Uh, and this is sort of, it does violence to the person when you treat them merely as a means to an end, especially in this most intimate of realms, that of human sexuality. This is wrong. And we it's like we have this kind of head conversion,
Mm-hmm.
but I still think that's where a lot of guys are. So they're convinced that porn's wrong, they're convinced they shouldn't be doing it, but it's not enough. And we kind of hope that head conversion sort of will be enough to get us over this, and it's not. And I think what has to happen, similar in our relationship with Jesus Christ, right? We have to bring the personal into it. Like when you
Mm-hmm.
read the Psalms, and it says things like, my Lord he is a refuge. He is a tower of refuge and strength, of my very present help in time of need. He is my shield, right? But what does that mean to you personally? Like Matt
Mm-hmm.
Fradd or John Edwards? Like you're like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like I have to bring my anxieties, right? 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast all your anxieties. So I got to get personal here. I can't just have these vague concepts of like fear and not being enough. Like it has to be really real, where you're like, Lord, I bring to you my fear of being repugnant, my fear of being broken somewhere beneath the surface, this fear that other people can spot it and they can just smell it on me, just this insecurity, Lord, that I have, this fear that you don't like me, that you love me, but you don't like me, you don't delight in me. Like, you got to get that real. I think that's what our Protestant brothers and sisters mean when they talk about a personal relationship with Christ. It's not enough to have that intellectual conversion. We have to kind of enter into it. And okay, so I think with pornography, that second step is it's like, I got to bring my own stuff into this, into the light of Christ's grace, and have it be transformed. So, like, for me, realizing, well, what is it that I'm seeking? Like, why is it that I want to go to pornography? What is the kind of pornography I even look at? There's like a vast canopy of pornography. Why do I always go to this and that kind of pornography? What is it that I'm after? What is this sort of trying to fix in me,
Yeah.
And again, I think a man has to be very real about that. And so I think for me, like at a young age, I agreed with the devil. I made certain agreements with him about who I was. I'm ugly, I'm weak, and I'm annoying. But those would be a few kind of real firm agreements that I sort of made as a young kid. Okay, so you think about that. Okay, so if I'm ugly and annoying and not a delight to people, and I'm weak. Okay, so then it would make sense that all of a sudden I start to see, whenever I go to pornography, I'm maybe seeing the sorts of pornography. You got to offer a disclaimer at the beginning of this, John. I don't want to trigger anybody, but
Sure.
I'm engaging in the sorts of pornography that would make me feel strong and wanted, and as a delight, And so once you start seeing that, okay, this is what it's trying to answer, this is why I keep going back to this, and then you turn to the Lord to answer those deep needs. That's been a journey that's ongoing for me. And the further I go into it, the more freedom I find. And it's not a freedom that can be manufactured, or it's not artificial. I know it to be true. And glory to Jesus Christ. So I think, if someone's struggling with pornography out there, that's why I'm a big proponent of finding a good therapist, and doing the work of inner healing, because that's been, at least for me personally, and those I know who've really found a good degree of freedom over this, that's it. It's not enough to white knuckle it and to know intellectually that this is wrong and that you shouldn't be doing it. If it was, then most Catholic men wouldn't be doing this stuff.
Sure. And it's important to find some people in your life too. I mean, I know you talk about that, like accountability. I know that's one thing. When we had started our men's group years ago, there were guys that would start talking about confession, and we'd say, well, why don't you want to go? And, well, I'm tired of telling the priest the same thing. And it would always, most of the time be, talking about masturbation or something like that, or pornography. And, a lot of guys, it's almost like the devil has a way of convincing you're the only one with a problem, right? You're the only alcoholic. You're the only guy that struggles with porn. You're the only, person that deals with this sin, and sort of isolates us. And one of the things that I found really helpful, because I struggled with pornography too, was just finding out that other guys really had the same issue, and then going with them and saying, hey, do you want to try to go through this together? Do you want to try to walk together in it? And I need someone there in my life I can call on, almost like somebody that's, an alcoholic that's going to pull in a bar on the way home, and before they order that stiff drink, they call somebody and say, hey, I'm at a bar and I need to talk to you. That sort of deal, where you've got that accountability in your life. Was that something that you had to have in your life, and something that you found helpful too? Was someone you could be held accountable with?
Yeah. I had to start being real about where I was at, as opposed to where I wanted to be. Sometimes those things are night and day. Where is it that I want to be? How is it I want to be perceived? And then how am I actually? So sort of bringing people into the actually part is a very important thing to do. And one of the reasons it's important is because you're lovable even there. So to the bloke who's watching this, who just spent last night on a bender and ended up masturbating to pornography, like, you're lovable there. And one of the things that accountability relationships do is reveal that to you. that there's someone there in your life who's not terribly impressed by your sin. In fact, your sin is the least interesting thing about you, actually.
Yeah.
But it's funny, in our tabloid culture, we make it the most interesting. It's not. It's the most boring thing about you. Like, it's really not interesting. But you bring someone into that, and that's a very helpful thing to do. And I think it's important not just to talk about how we fall, but how we want to grow as men, and what are some goals we want to reach, and how we'd like to start eating, and how we'd start to like moving, exercising, perhaps how we'd like to start engaging with our friends and family, and those sorts of things can be brought into that accountability relationship. It's not just, did you fall? Oh yes, I did. It's more like, how are you doing? Like, how is your life
Sure.
good and beautiful? you know
Yeah. Well, and people that can help you too, like you said, you need a therapist and things like that at some point. One of my favorite people is Dr. Bob Schutz, and I know you know Dr. Bob. And one of the things that's helped me with a lot of different sins in my life is just understanding that those come from previous wounds, and that when we are engaging in pornography or we're acting out in other ways, that it's really a symptom of something else. And I mean, have you have you spent a lot of time doing that, like talking to people about, look, what's behind this, what's causing it, where do you think this is coming from? Because I think a lot of people, it really is like that diagram of the tree that he has in his book, where we walk up and we grab that apple off the tree and take it in and we hand it to our priest in the confessional and say, here I am again with this. But we're not really getting down to the deeper issues of why we continue to do it. And I think that's where most men stay, is they're like, I'm doing this, I don't really know why. And then we start to justify it and other people do it and all of those things, instead of really dialing into why is this an issue in my life and where's it coming from?
yeah, that's what I was referencing when I talked about, what is it this is trying to fix in me? What am I trying
Yeah.
to medicate? So that's that second step. So it's one thing
Mm-hmm.
to know porn's wrong and I shouldn't be looking at it. It's another step to realize, but I bloody well do want to look at it. And what is it I'm trying to get from this thing? That after the sort of pseudo consummation, the false consummation that occurs, I'm aware that it didn't give it to me, in a sense. It's like, it's shameful, it's gross, I don't want to do this. And that's where I think realizing that we're turning this to this thing for different reasons. Someone said, when we run from our shame, we legitimize its claims against us.
Mm.
And so there's something to be said about sort of just acknowledging what it is we're seeking and why it is we're going there. And that's a hard thing, man, because a lot of this takes deep work with someone who can pray with you and love you and go into those places where you have sort of made agreements when you were young about who you are and what you're about. Let me just say something kind about Bob Schutz. I always like to
Sure.
speak kindly behind people's backs when nobody knows about the good things they do. So
Sure.
I'd moved here to Steubenville back in January, and as soon as we arrived, it was the middle of winter. My children were all trying to process the move. My wife was incredibly sick. We didn't know why. She was hospitalized twice, two
Mm.
week-long visits. It was very serious. I was in a really bad place. And Bob was writing to me asking me if I'd read a book of his to endorse it. And I said to him, Bob, all I want to do is smoke pot and listen to Radiohead. Like, that's all I want to do.
Yeah.
So that's how I was doing. I'm like, that's how I'm doing. Like, not great. And he
Yeah.
said, can we pray? I said, yes. And so we met that week over Zoom for an hour to pray. And then we did it again. And then we did it the next week. And we've been doing it ever since. It's been about a year.
Mm.
And about the third or fourth week in, realizing that I wanted this to continue, and also that his time is valuable, I wanted to
Yeah.
offer him money, but in a way that he'd accept it. If I was just like, hey, can I pay you for this stuff? Like, no, I wanted to say this in a way that he'd accept it. And so he'd keep doing this. So I said,
Mm-hmm.
Bob, this has been terrific. I really got a lot out of this. I was thinking I should be probably seeing a therapist anyway. So I was wondering if I could just give your organization a donation, or if I could please start supporting paying you something like that. And he said, no. No,
Mm.
that's not what it's about. I think we need to pray together. You know? So what a guy. What a guy. Dr. Bob Schutz. Good and
Yeah.
holy man. He's also a great help in my own life.
Yeah, he has been for me too. Angela and I went through a spat a couple of
Whoop,
months ago
sorry.
where we were just,
Something has come undone in some horrible way.
uh-oh, okay.
Oh
Can you hear me?
dear. Okay, I think I can hear you now. Sorry.
You can hear me now? Can you hear me?
Sorry about
Okay.
that.
No, I was just saying that Dr. Bob, he's helped me a lot too. You know, I met him through some of the conference stuff we were doing, and Angela and I had gone through a spat where a lot of it was my fault. You know, I was just being real selfish and falling back into some previous tendencies, and I called Dr. Bob and I said, I just, you know, I'm really kind of in a bad spot right now, and I don't know what to do. And he's like, well, you know what? We're having a marriage conference in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I will pay for your wife and you to come there if you can come. Now, we couldn't go because it was like a day away, and we just couldn't find flights and all those things. But he told me, he said, John, anytime, you know, I'd be glad to talk to both of you and all those things. So he is one of the most
Yeah.
genuine people I think I've ever met, as far as
Yeah.
like he's in ministry to help people and he's not worried about anything
Yeah.
else. And that's what I told him. I said, I feel like such a hypocrite because here I am, you know, with a podcast, all these things, talking to men about being better men, and yet I'm failing in this area with my wife. And he said, John, what do you think it feels like when you're a marriage therapist and your marriage is failing? He said,
Mm.
because that's what I've gone through in my life. And I just was like,
Mm.
wow, you know. And so, yeah, he's a blessing for sure. Well, Matt, I want to talk about a couple other things here, you know, just real quickly before we depart here. But as far as men in the church today, and as you know, the church is in a crazy place. Like I'm reading Ralph Martin's A Crisis in the Church right now, and it's just
Yeah.
he's so dead on with so many things he's saying. And when I look at our faith and where it is, what I see a gaping hole is just men not standing up and living the faith the way they're called to. We're either enamored with the world and the things that it puts in front of us: money, fame, power, achievement, selfishness, all of those things. Where do you see? What do you see with men right now, and what we need from men in the church? Because I know you talk to all of these great folks all the time, and my opinion is we need more men to stand up. But what do you think about that, and where some of the issues lie in the church right now?
It'd be weird if I was like, no, I don't think we need more men to stand up. I think we're
That's
good.
right.
It'd be weird.
No, we're good. We have a couple.
No, I do see men sort of desiring a life of greater Christian authenticity. I see that in movements like Exodus 90, where for 90 days you act like a maniac and give up things that make you happy, like candy and alcohol. I'm only
That's
joking,
right.
but,
And hot showers.
you know, like there are men who are doing that. There's a real desire, like, please take me seriously. You know, I really want to do this well. So I think we just need to tap into that. I think that is being tapped into, while at the same time reminding ourselves that we have a merciful God. I don't know. I think those two things together, because it can be easy to see the chaos in the church, the chaos in your own heart, to courageously decide to be better, and then to hate yourself when you see that you're not.
Yeah.
So I think we need to both sort of, stand up and realize that we stand up sort of under this great King who is more merciful than we are wretched. And so we can't overstate our own wretchedness, but we also can't overstate his great mercy, which is attracted to our wretchedness, which chose to suffer and die to open heaven under our feet. So we have a good and gracious King who loves us individually and who's calling us to be dissatisfied with what the world would give us, and calling us into a deeper life of prayer. So it's exciting. It's an exciting time.
Yeah. We have to remember we don't have a God that's disgusted by us. I think that's one thing we do is we're disgusted with ourselves, and we think he must be too. And, you know, that's, you and I talked about it on your show, but just the prodigal son, where that guy, the son comes back and he's covered in the pig dung and the slop and all this stuff, and the father doesn't reject him. He goes right to him and in his finest robes and all those things, and, you know, doesn't ask him to go hose off or anything first. You know, he just gives him
totally
his best of everything. Right? I would have too. I'm like, I can't see God like this. Let me shower up real quick. But no,
Yeah.
it's just it's something I think we all forget as men. And so Matt, like I appreciate first of all your friendship, and just it's been a joy to get to know you and to get to spend time with you. And I really appreciate you coming on here because so many guys they write in and they tell me, man, I listen to Pints, I listen to your show, I found it through there. So thank you for all of that and for what
Yeah,
you've done,
great.
man. Just all these years for all the people that you've spoken in front of and just written books for and all of that. Thank you for all your contributions to the church. And I really value your friendship and thank you for coming on here today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to end this interview here. But if you are a member of the Just a Guy in the Pew community, Matt and I are going to jump over there for a few minutes and we're going to record another session there. And we're going to be talking about, 5 things or 6 things that Matt can tell you if you're dealing with porn and how to start the stopping process of that and the healing that's necessary. So, Matt, again, thank you for joining us. And guys, you can become a member at justaguyinthepew.com. Go up to join the community and click there, and you'll be able to see all of the interviews and extra bits that we've done like this before. So, again, thank you for your time, Matt. Love you, brother, and I'll see you real soon.
Thanks.